Okay, I want to welcome Dave Stedman, who was a second lieutenant in 3 independent companies stationed at Inyanga during the war. And Dave was an officer who came out of intake 147, which there's a book called Never Fear, 147 is Here, written by Paul Allen and Dave Fremantle. Dave Stedman features in this book, and I'm going to be putting a link in the description of the video for those of you who want to obtain a copy of this book. But I'm very happy to have Dave here at last. We've been trying to get together for a while because Dave has a story he wants to tell, which includes the Battle of Inyangombe. So without further ado, Dave, I'm going to hand over to you. You want to start from the beginning?
Yep. Hi there. My name is Dave Stedman, and I've been asked to do a talk on the Battle of Inyangombe, which took place in the Inyanga area in the 25th of November 1976 and continued as a series of running battles and skirmishes for the next few days. The initial combatants were 3 independent company RR based at Inyanga. However, we were not at Inyanga camp as such. We were at a base camp up in Tanda TTL, which is the Inyanga North area. Okay. If I can give you some background before I go too much further. By 1976, contacts in the Inyanga area involving 3 independent company and various other Rhodesian companies that came into the area were quite common. By this stage of the war, so late 1976, the Terrs had changed their tactics and they were sending large forces into the country. They were very well armed with 12.7 and 14.5 millimeter machine guns, 60 and 80 millimeter mortars. And their most common tactic was to actually attack an army camp, which they had done at this point in time pretty successfully. For example, the 31st of August, 6 independent company were revved at Rhodesia in Inyanga North TTL, and although they didn't lose anybody, there were 12 serious casualties. 4 RR also got revved, I believe it was twice, and in the one attack, I think it was the Sabi Star one, 5 were dead and there were quite a lot of guys injured. Whilst using these large forces basically to try and intimidate the army, it didn't stop the attacks on places like Ruda and Yamaropa police stations and Roads Department camps and so on. Against the background of this, 3 independent company had been deployed up into the Tanda area because there was info had come in that there was going to be an imminent incursion of a large force. This large force came into contact with elements of, I believe, the SAS up in the north there, and later it transpires that maybe this was just one part of a big force that had been split into several sections. Anyway, the 3 independent company had been deployed out in the field, and we built a base camp with trenches and overhead protection and all those good things that protected the troops. I must mention that the whole company had moved out to the sticks, and we just left 1 platoon, 3 platoon, back at Inyanga to hold the fort. By this stage of the war, 3 independent company had become a 6 platoon company, comprising at this stage of intakes 147 and intake 151. Our battle captain, Captain Errol Mann of the RAR, had received information that this large group of Terrs were moving in our direction. Now, he had information that by this stage, the splinter groups had joined together again, and there were approximately 230 terrorists in the group. So in conjunction with Major Barrett of the SAS, they planned a little welcoming party, an interception for the terrorists. The idea was that the company would be deployed all along the river, all along the, onto OPs during the day, and ambush the various crossing points on the river at night. This way we intended to make sure that terrorists did not get very far and had the welcome they did not desire. The day before this all took place, one platoon had joined up with the SAS as a stop group, or a series of stop groups, in an operation that was north of Rwangwe. And they were chop it into the contact, and then they would chop it back to base later on. A terrorist was captured in this contact, and he spilled the beans, to the effect that the witch doctors had said that as long as the terrorists kept along the banks of the Inyangombe River, they would be protected from attacks by the army. Now, in this contact I mentioned earlier on, they had all the guys at bombshell. This terrorist who had been captured seemed to indicate that they were actually coming to our base camp to attack us, and it was going to take them several days to get there. So this is when Errolman and Major Barrett came up with a plan, and they swung into action. The 5 platoons that were actually out in the field were all sent radio messages to get back to the base camp as quickly as possible. There was then a briefing, and all the platoons had to carry 8 days ration, jerry cans of water, and lots of ammunition and hand grenades in anticipation of making contact with this large group. The briefing took place firstly of the officers and NCOs, and then a general briefing. And then after supper, the sticks were sent out into the bush at intervals, just to make sure that they didn't have any friendly fire incidents. My own stick, 3-2, was kept back as the first reaction platoon should there be some kind of contact in the next 24-48 hours. By about 9:30 p.m., 3-2 Bravo was one of the last sticks to depart. They went out of the camp and crossed over a concrete bridge, and then they hived off from the other stick that had gone with them at the same time, and they turned north, walking up the banks of the Inyangombe River, and the other platoon carried around further, I guess it would be further west. At about 21:30, 3-2 Bravo and the other stick departed, and about 2200 hours, all hell broke loose. What had actually happened was that 3-2 Bravo, who was normally led by Corporal Chris Goosen, was being led by Hendrik Botha, a Lance Corporal, purely because Hendrik's night vision wasn't very good. And Hendrik was suddenly challenged by somebody in the darkness, and he just shot the person who challenged him. Then all hell broke loose. The sky lit up like a Sydney Bridge New Year's Eve festival. There were fireworks going off everywhere, or so it seemed. Of course, there was contact, but nobody knew exactly what was going on or where. Fortunately, Chris Goosen managed to get on the radio and indicate it was his stick and approximately where they were. In the initial contact, Hendrik took 3 rounds in his buttocks as he lay flat on the ground. But unfortunately, Fred Kuhn was hit in his magazine of his brain gun, which exploded and blew his stomach out and his lungs and so on. Of course, the immediate reaction of all the other sticks in the area was to turn and start going back towards where 3-2 Bravo was now having the contact. Chris managed to give Captain Mann pretty good directions as to whereabouts they were, and he just moved his mortar out of the mortar pit to the closest point he could, and then just started lobbing bombs out from a 60mm mortar. Chris, lying on the ground there, then directed mortar fire to keep up a barrage of bombs between his stick and the Turs. With Chris wounded, and at that stage we thought Fred Koen was badly injured, I was then summoned to go and take my stick, the medic was in my stick, and stretchers, and head for the contact area under cover of darkness. Our biggest problem, in fact, was the possibility, or even the probability, of us having friendly fire contacts. So all sticks were told to stand down and maintain basically a half moon and not go in. By this time already, one of the call signs closest to Chris Corson had actually managed to get to him. My stick then headed straight out from the camp through the river, and we found Chris in the darkness. In the meantime, there was still sporadic fire going on all around us. But of course, we were as jittery as hell. By my guess, by now it was probably about 20 past, 10:30, and we had found Chris's stick in the dark. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do for Fred Koen. He had passed from his injuries in the meantime. We then set about securing the area and then loading Chris onto a stretcher along with Fred Koen, and slowly making our way back in the darkness towards the camp. Along the way, there appeared to be sporadic contacts going on around us, and our progress is very, very slow. In fact, it was probably just about first light by the time we actually got back to the base camp. Once we got back to the base camp, Chris Corson was whisked off to hospital, and Fred's body was placed in a tent. And really all I could do was go in and pay my respects to him and then go back out into the sticks. Initially, we were ordered to do a sweep of the area, and we were just amazed with the amount of arms and equipment that was left scattered in the area. The incredible thing was we could see where the mortar bombs had landed, either from the pattern on the ground or from the fact that the people running away were taking 4-foot strides, and then suddenly they were taking 6-foot or 7-foot strides as they ran like hell. By about 7:30 in the morning, it was just silent. There was nobody around there, and our initial job was to gather up all the arms, the ammunition that we could, and we actually filled nearly four fires with stuff that we captured at that point in time. In the meantime, the rest of the company set out. There was a quick revision of the plan, and a number of the guys in the company could actually track. So they started off on tracks immediately. And over the next while, as a number of little contacts took place. Then what happened was the whole area was just swamped by incoming troops. I think SAS was there, and I think 4RR. With 3 Indep hot on the tracks, other assistance was called for from SAS and from 4RR to come in and bolster the effort and to try and predict where the Turs were going to go and leapfrog them and put stop groups between our contact point and the border. With the Turs bomb shelling, they didn't go off in very small groups. They initially went out in probably 3 or 4 large groups and then split up again. And so over the next 2 or 3 days, there were a number of contacts where either 3 independent company or some of the other forces that came in had contacts with the terrorists. Certainly, I I remember one incident where Sergeant Kukitamba, who was from 3 Platoon, had run into a terrorist. Now 3 Platoon had been initially back at base camp, but with this large-scale operation, they were called in, and they were also on tracks. And Kukitamba told me that he had gone round the back of an anthill, round about midday, to go and have a leak. And on the other side of the anthill, he found a terrorist lying there wounded. He was actually too weak to even pick up his firearm and open fire. So they captured that guy, and then they noticed there was a peculiar odor in the area. And in searching around, they then found another body of a terrorist in the undergrowth. And this was the pattern we had for the next 4 or 5 days. We'd find wounded Turs or dead Turs, some of them even shot by the terrorists themselves, as we pursued them back towards the border. In the introduction by John Fitzale, he mentions a book written by Dave Freemantle and Paul Allen. The book is called Never Fear, 147 is Here. And it is the story of Inte 147, which covers a lot of this ground in a lot more detail than I'm going to go into now. It also contains many stories relating to the other half of Inte 147, which are the guys that went to 5 Indep at Mtali. One of the things which I don't think is mentioned in the book is a story relating to the aftermath of this large contact. After we'd been collecting up bodies and so on, Alistair Bushney was going on leave, and he had to, he was driving up to Salisbury, and his 4-5 was full of bodies. And the strange thing is that we counted 42 bodies that are in that truck. Now, at least 42 were killed, because there is a place near Inyanga where we buried body parts that could not be identified. So a body minus a hand, minus a head, or minus hands, minus a head, because it was pointless taking these all the way up to Salisbury. So at the end of the day, we don't know exactly how many terrorists from this group were killed in Rhodesia. What we do know was after the operation finished, either SAS or Zulu Scouts went into the base camp in Mozambique and went and cleared out a few more of them. So it is believed that, in fact, at the end of the day, the death toll for the Turs was in the order of 80 Turs. We, as far as I know, only lost one, being Fred Kuhn in the initial contact. There is quite an amusing incident in one of these running contacts. I've been sent out, and I was watching over a kraal where it was believed the Turs were feeding. I saw Mvazi coming out with a bowl of mealy pup, and I'd called this in. Almost at the same time, somewhere nearby, there was a crackle of gunfire, and a contact started. Well, Errol Man jumped into his faithful 2.5, we called it his battle wagon, with his signaller, and he took along as many cooks and bottle washers and anybody he could find around the camp they could spare. Now, Errol's 2.5 was equipped with a 60mm mortar and I think a Browning machine gun. So he came hurtling down the road at rate of knots, and the next thing I see is an explosion in the road. So obviously the Turs were fairly close, but not seen by me, and either had a mortar or a RPG or something like that. Well, Errol was forced to leave the highway and take the byway. He promptly went through a barbed wire fence and into a hen house. The whole hen house just collapsed, and there were chickens flying around everywhere. And Errol emerged on the other side, and across the top of his bonnet was part of the wall of the hen house, and bits and pieces of string wire and heaven knows what else attached to it. And there he is hurtling down the road, now with a laden 2.5. So he stopped, debussed, and he was given instructions by the nearest stick on the ground as to where the Terrs were. And he was heading into that position, and he came under fire again by a mortar. And at my elevated position, he said to me, "Take these buggers out." So, but now my gunner was Hendrik Botha, who had replaced my normal MAG gunner temporarily. My MAG gunner was Mark Hope Hall, and he'd been forced to go back to camp because he'd walked into buffalo beans and got buffalo beans in his eyes. Hendrik, now without a stick, had joined my stick as my gunner. Anyway, my instructions to Hendrik were to take out that mortar. Now, all we could see was just puffs of smoke. So I said to him, "Fire at the smoke." And by fluke, what had happened was my stick, Errol, and the mortar were basically in a straight line. Hendrik opened fire, and Errol man was suddenly on the radio, "For shit's sakes, that's me you're revving." So he got away with it. No harm was done. But strange enough, some 35 years later, when we met up at a reunion, Hendrik reminded him of the incident and the fact that we nearly killed him. And Errolman said to Hendrik, "Good job, you're such a shit shot." Hendrik replied, No, sir. I hit what I was aiming at. It just happened to be over your heads." And that was the nature of the things. It was a series of running contacts. And when you think about it, it's amazing that one serviceman, Rhodesian serviceman, died. And at the end of the day, in all likelihood, approximately 80 Terrs paid for it. As a result of this action, the Terrs took a hell of a pounding. In all their previous attacks on army camps, they'd definitely come out on top. But this time, their losses were heavy. And I think after that, they had to change their tactics again, because if you've got decent intelligence, the army was ready for them, and they were not prepared to take on the army under those circumstances. So perhaps that might be the one good thing that actually came out of this incident, was the fact that I think it stopped these large-scale forces crossing the border and trying to rev army camps.